Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. I am joining you from the bookstore itself, which is really exciting. This is Left Bank Books welcomes debut author Jessica Johns, who will discuss her brand new book, Bad Cree, out today. Johns will be in conversation with acclaimed author Alicia Elliott. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Jessica and Alicia, and especially tonight, the Reader Beware reading group, who is hosting, not even that far from me, our watch party here in the store. I would also like to thank everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We offer in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. So if you're watching from next door to Jessica, we can mail a book to you. And we are very happy to be able to bring our event series virtual and hybrid even. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. So we hope that you enjoyed this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy of the book for you or for your friends on our website, left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating. So thank you so much for your support. I'm Shane Mullen. I'm the event coordinator for Left Bank Books. We produce hundreds of author events each year here in St. Louis with a fantastic team. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so you can type your questions as a comment. Be sure to type those up as we go along. And you can follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic events. We have a lot of events planned in person for this winter and spring, but we will continue to offer virtual events and hybrid events to the virtual world. So a lot of our events, if they are happening here in St. Louis, can be viewed from wherever you are. And be sure to check out our event calendar on our website for full details about our upcoming event programming. Now, about tonight's book, Bad Cree. In this gripping, horror-laced debut, a young Cree woman's dreams lead her on a perilous journey of self-discovery that ultimately forces her to confront the toll of the legacy of violence on her family, her community, and the land they call home. When Mackenzie wakes up with a severed crow's head in her hands, she panics. Only moments earlier, she had been fending off masses of birds in a snow-covered forest. In bed, when she blinks, the head disappears. Night after night, Mackenzie's dreams return her to a memory from before her sister Sabrina's untimely death. A weekend at the family's lakefront campsite, long obscured by a fog of guilt. But when the waking world starts closing in too, a murder of crows stalks her every move around the city. She wakes up from a dream of drowning, throwing up water, and gets threatening text messages from someone claiming to be Sabrina. Mackenzie knows this is more than she can handle alone. Traveling north to her rural hometown in Alberta, she finds her family still steeped in the same grief that she ran away to Vancouver to escape. They welcome her back, but their shaky reunion only seems to intensify her dreams and make them more dangerous. What really happened that night at the lake, and what did it have to do with Sabrina's death? Only a Bad Cree would put their family at risk. But what if whatever had been calling Mackenzie home was already inside? Tonight's book was featured on CrimeReads' unprecedented era of Native American noir, and Paul Tremblay, the author of A Head Full of Ghosts in the Pallbearers Club, says, Bad Cree deftly explores the permeable boundaries of dreams, reality, and culture, as well as a complex family dynamics and relationships. A compelling novel that is a mystery and a horror story about grief, but one with defiant hope in its beating heart. And now about tonight's speakers. Jessica Johns is a Nehiyaw, aunty, and member of Sucker Creek First Nation in Treaty 8 territory in Northern Alberta. She is an interdisciplinary artist and winner of the 2020 Writers Trust Journey Prize. Tonight, she will be in conversation with Alicia Elliott. Alicia is a Mohawk writer and editor living in Brantford, Ontario. She has written for The Globe and Mail, CBC, Hazlitt, and many others. She's had numerous essays nominated for the National Magazine Awards, winning gold in 2017 and an honorable mention in 2020. Her short fiction was selected for Best American Short Stories 2018 by the incredible Roxane Gay, Best American Stories 2018, and Journey Prize Stories 30. Alicia was chosen by Tanya Talaga as the 2018 recipient of the RBC Taylor Emerging Writer Award. Her first book, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground, was a national bestseller in Canada. It was also nominated for the Hilary Weston Writers Trust Prize for Nonfiction and won the Forest of Reading Evergreen Award. And now, if you would all please help me in welcoming our fantastic guests for the evening. We have Jessica Johns and Alicia Elliott. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey.
I am so excited that we are hosting the launch event for this event, and we are all over the country, all over the North American continent, different country. The continent was the word I was looking for. So I'm so excited that you both are here with us and that the reading group is joining us for a little watch party. They have wine.
Jealous.
Yeah, I just have water. So
Same. I have lemon water, so it's kind of spicy.
Ooh. All right. Well, I'm going to turn this conversation over to you, and I am so eager to hear more about this book.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was such a wonderful and warm introduction.
okay, so now it's just us.
Yes.
Okay, so I feel like the best way usually to start any kind of event like this is just to have you read. Do you have like a passage picked out?
You know I do, baby. I got it. I got it dog-eared and ready to go.
I'm excited.
Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of a I don't think this passage needs very much introduction because it doesn't have a lot to do with the plot. But I really love reading it because it's quite it occurs quite early in the novel, and it's just a scene of Mackenzie, our protagonist. It's a memory of hers and her sisters and her cousin and her cookum and mom and aunts out on this lake where they spend a lot of time in Mackenzie's territory. And I just really love it because it has cookum in it and like family dynamics. So you don't need a whole lot of, backstory to sort of understand what's going on. By the shore, me, Tracy, and Cassidy were digging holes next to the water. Sabrina sat against a cluster of jack pines, reading a book about trees. She was already reading at a grade 7 level and read anything about plants she could get her hands on. I don't think I ever saw her that summer without a book in her hands. We looked up when we heard a crunch coming from the trail that led to our campsite. Cookum emerged from the woods like a creature from the deep. With a cigarette in her hand, she swatted at the mosquitoes in front of her while pulling a giant blue wagon behind her. Cookum was shorter than all of her daughters, though she didn't look it, and she was all teeth. Her real teeth rotted out as a kid, and when she got her dentures, they were too big and too white for her mouth. I think I fell in love with her teeth first. How they were so even and moved to the sound of the room. She used to call them a weapon. Stronger than regular teeth, she would say. Can bite right through bone. Don't ask me how I know. Her party trick was putting her teeth in our water cups when we weren't looking, laughing when we'd spot the enamel staring back at us as we put our lips to the glass. She wheeled the wagon over to the campfire and whistled at us, even though we were already watching her. We normally were whenever she walked into a space. She waved her hand in front of the wagon like a magician, the smoke from her cigarette curling around her body. We all dropped the sticks we were using as shovels and ran over to her. Sabrina left her book right on the ground. Mom, hearing the whistle, came out from inside one of the tents she was setting up. Hola, where the hell did you get that? Cookham smirked over her shoulder at Mom while her grandkids circled her in hugs. Cookham has her ways. Auntie Verna popped her head out of a tent next to Mom's. There's no way that's going to fit all those kids. They're not babies anymore, you know. Watch your tongue, Cookham said, taking a drag of her cigarette. These babies will fit just fine. I breathed her in as she talked to Mom and the aunties. Even with all of us kids pushing against her, she was sturdy like the trees she just came through. Her soft stomach moved under my head as I pressed into her harder. Okay, let's take this out for a spin. She grabbed Sabrina by the hand and helped the rest of us get into the wagon. The cigarette, mostly ash, dangled from the side of her mouth, moving up and down as she talked. She started wheeling us back to the trail. Don't worry about us, Mom yelled. We'll make sure to get everything cleaned and set up. That's my girl, Cookham waved behind her. We're just going to walk for a couple high prairie minutes. That's what Cookham used to call walking the trails through the woods. Mom rolled her eyes. Well, how long is that? The minutes take as long as they need to. A minute to her was the distance between two trail openings on the lake. No two openings in particular. It was just the amount of time it took to get from one trail leading from the woods to the water and the next. Sometimes these openings were only a few feet apart. Sometimes they took forever. This is how I learned the trails around the lake, how I started to make myself a part of their paths. Before we had the wagon, we'd just walk, and she'd point out plants and what they could do, tell us stories and jokes. Wap and wask, she said once, pointing at the ground to a yellow stalk sprouting tiny white flowers growing in a plume. Your mom's favorite. Fitting. Yarrow is stubborn, like her. Only grows where it wants. Doesn't take orders from anybody. Sabrina wrote down everything Cookham told us about plants. She even drew sketches and eventually started painting them. Me, Cass, and Tracy were more interested in her stories. Sometimes she'd take us on a long walk right before we were supposed to be leaving, when Mom and the aunties were packing up the campsite. By the time we got back, it would be late. We only walked a couple minutes, Cookham would say when Mom got mad at her. Mom shook her head. A couple minutes, my ass, she said as she started to unpack, setting up camp again for us to stay one more night. It's not the only way to measure time, Cookham said once. Sometimes time is measured in the days between phone calls with your Cookham, which should never be very many. Sometimes it's the measure of a heartbeat. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I actually knew exactly which scene you were talking about as soon as you started talking about it, because it was just one of those, like you said, it was just like a really warm memory of all of them together, of, the family unit in a really great moment, that's in a very familiar area and everything like that. So kind of, I guess the most obvious question to ask any author is what your inspiration was for this novel. And I would love to hear how you started, what the spark of the idea was and everything.
Yeah, that is a great question. Sorry, I'm absolutely fascinated by the Moving Left Bank Books presents Jessica Jones Bad Cree at the bottom. It's like a news report and it feels really fun, but my eyes keep going to it. Yeah, so Bad Cree actually started, or like the actual concept for the premise, which is that this the protagonist, Mackenzie, can bring items back and forth from her dreams that actually started as a dream that I had, that like I could do this thing. And I woke up from that dream being like, that's a really cool idea, but kind of put it aside. I didn't think too much about, it didn't occur to me really to write about it or anything. And a couple of things happened in between having that dream and actually writing the short story, which was the first thing. And one of those things was I finished The Marrow Thieves by Cherie Dimaline. And that book is all about the validity of dreams. And in fact, they're so important that they're mined, you know, they're taken from Indigenous people. And I remember finishing that book and just bawling my eyes out because of how I just felt really seen in a way that I hadn't felt in you know, reading books, you know, prior to that. And also I was finishing my MFA at the University of British Columbia, and I had a teacher, a professor in a class give the bad advice, in my opinion, to not write about your dreams. He said, you know, this will lose your readers. It will bore them. You know, don't write about your dreams. And it wasn't the first time that something in academia really didn't align with my own knowings and beliefs. And, but it was one of the ones that really stuck with me because I was a really impressionable young writer. I wanted to learn everything that I could. And like, I am learning from these, like, you know, these professionals, these like very well-known writers. And it just felt icky. And so I went away from that and I was just like, you know, I don't think that's right. Actually, I know that's not right. And I'm going to write a short story that is really cool and is really engaging and, you know, that people will not find like boring or not valid. And that went on to win a prize. So I guess I was right.
Not just any prize either. It was the Journey Prize, which for any readers who don't know that are joining us from the States, it's like the short story prize in Canada. So I just want to make sure that that's like really, really clear that she won the prize for this short story, despite the, you know, the weird advice that's saying don't write about this. So, you know, shove it to whatever teacher that is.
I'll tell you what it was after.
Okay, sounds good. So then, so I know that you started it, as you said, as a short story, but I guess, what was it that made you think that you could then turn this into a novel? And I don't know, because I haven't checked with you, but I know that you had at least one other short story that came from the novel, and I'm not sure whether you adapted the novel into the short story is what I feel like you did for that one. And so like you kind of have this moving fluidity back and forth between the form of the novel and the form of the short story. So what was that like moving between the two? What is it, you know, so like, I guess this is like a multi-pronged question, one of those annoying things, but, you know, what was it that made you think this is good to be a novel? And then what was it like moving between short story and novel, both directions?
Well, I love short stories. I love reading short stories and I love writing short stories. I've published a few. And, you know, normally when when I write a short story and it goes out in the world, I feel done with it. Like, and same thing with poetry. I also write poetry and I don't really think too much about it afterwards. In terms of like a creative process. But with Bad Cree, I wrote it and it was published in Grain magazine and it went on to win the 2020 Journey Prize. But even before it was published and even before it won anything, the story just really stayed with me. I kept thinking about Mackenzie. I kept thinking about other characters in this world that actually didn't live in the short story yet, that weren't on the page. And I just kept thinking about that world and, you know, what that could look like if I spent more time there. And so I just listened to that feeling. I listened to, you know, these characters like pounding at my door being like, we're not done yet. So I had to learn a lot to build it into a novel. But one of the things is that, I mean, as a writer, you are like, publishing short stories is, as much as I love reading and writing them, it's also like, as a writer, you have to make money as you're doing your job. Like, it's your job, it's my job, you know? So I was publishing short stories, and some of them I really also still like loved in ways that felt fitting to Bad Cree. So there are a couple of short stories that I've published that I actually altered to use as scenes in Bad Cree. And the one that I just read actually is the beginning of one called Fort Vermilion Mile that I published like a little while ago. And I think that though they are different stories and they're used in different ways for, you know, what they eventually become, they just felt malleable in that way and really fit in the world of the story. But jumping between both and working in both is really interesting because you have to use very different craft like techniques and just like, yeah, just different methods of writing. Well, I do anyways. And it's really like challenging and rewarding.
Yeah, I think, or I kind of like started trying to write a short story to start myself into a novel recently, and it's so interesting because like going from something that's like a fully encapsulated form into like basically exploding out is really interesting. And so I feel like when I was reading Bad Cree, and I had read, I think, at least one of the short stories that were eventually part of the novel prior to, possibly two. But anyways, it was really interesting though once I got to those sections and saw how you incorporated them in. And there was like almost like a different type of weaving that was going on. And so the beats of the short story weren't necessarily the same beats in the novel, but it kind of became part of the texture overall, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And that's a thing too, is that the pacing of a short story is understandably very different to a novel because you're going from reading something very short to something very long. So those beats had to change. There are elements about the short stories that I really wanted to keep in terms of tone and mood. But the things I was using to create that, like, you know, intentional omission and sparseness, I had to use like the opposite almost in the novel, like building out and expanding, but keep the tone. So I had to use different beats and, you know, when I was expanding it out, I had to try and just use different methods to like keep the energy that I wanted to keep.
One of the things, it's funny that you mentioned, you know, kind of, I guess, questionable, we'll say, advice from MFA programs, because I know I didn't go through an MFA program, but I did go through an undergrad program in creative writing. And I feel like for so many writers, as people who perhaps like we grew up loving a particular genre, we get into these kind of like programs that really kind of hammer in that there's really no literary merit in genres apart from literary fiction.
Yes.
And I feel like that is something that I really appreciated that you kind of like, I don't know, it felt like I mean, obviously, I'm sure this wasn't exactly your intention, but as I was reading it, I kept thinking of like all of these ideas. Oh, well, you know, horror can't be literary, or, you know, there's no point in doing anything that's from a different genre or anything like that. And it kind of felt like a fuck you to that. Like, you know, pardon my language, but you know, it is one of those things where for me anyways, when I'm reading literary fiction, so often I feel like, you know, there is some really good stuff, but often I'm just kind of like feeling like I want more structure. I want more tension. I want more, you know, of like consequences, essentially,
Yeah.
like things moving forward. And
Yeah.
so I think that I'm interested in hearing what it was like for you to decide to go full into horror for your first book. What the horror genre means to you, what you get from it, and why it was the right kind of I guess vehicle for this story.
First of all, I'm so excited to talk about horror with you in particular because your book coming out is also horror. And for someone like, you know, like the history of horror, and I feel like I'm just really excited to talk about it with you in particular. And yes, it's a thing that in academia, genre is really frowned upon, or like looked down on. And I think it's really classist. I think there's a classist element to it. You know, literary fiction is looked to as this standard of literary excellence and of merit, as if genre can't hold literary merit because it is liked by too many people. Like, I don't really know what the argument is, but it is something that I really came up against when I was doing my MFA, and not particularly by students necessarily, though certainly many. But it was just very strange. Like I didn't feel that prepared for it. But I think, as I was saying, like I was just a very impressionable emerging writer. So I was taking in all these things I was learning. And that's one of the things that was sort of, I felt, being herded to believe, or being herded to kind of follow in, which was writing literary fiction. And I think I tried. Like, I think that I was, and there is some good literary fiction for sure. And I think there are some like craft things that can be interesting about literary fiction. But it's just not something I'm personally interested in doing. And when I was writing the novel, I just kept thinking, like, I want to write the novel that I want to read now, and I would have wanted to read when I was younger, because I love horror. I love reading horror. I love watching horror movies. And so I just leaned in. I was just like, I'm going to go for it. The you know, parts of horror that I really, really love, but like maybe I didn't always see when I was younger, as much as I was devouring it. There were still a lot of elements of it that you know, that didn't fit a lot of the time. And so I wanted to write something that did.
What were your kind of horror influences as like a younger writer that really, or like movies or books or authors or anything that really like captured you as you were kind of a young reader, that really influenced, I guess, how you approached the genre with Bad Cree?
Yeah, you know what? I consider a lot of things that I watched when I was younger horror, even though they might not have been. But I think, like, follow me on this. So I was a big Stephen King reader. Like, I feel like that was my first horror introduction, was reading it wasn't Stand By Me. That was the movie, but the short that was in that, there was this, and he had like a collection that was all seasons they were like novellas almost together, and they all had elements of horror before he really, really leaned into horror that I really loved. But for movies, the movies that I feel really influenced me, like when I was growing up, there was this, like, I feel like children were exposed to really terrifying movies that I don't think were intended to be this terrifying. But like, did you ever watch The Secret of Nim or The Rats of Nim? Okay, there's this like a cartoon movie called The Rats of Nim or The Secret of Nim, depending on, I think there was like a Canada version and a US version. That is so terrifying. It's about these like little mice that have to move out of the field that they live in before the farmer goes by with his tractor. But the woman's son is sick, so she can't move him, so she has to get help from these rats, and there's a scary owl. It's all very terrifying, and it's like supposed to be for kids, but it was like very dark and really moody. And Once Upon a Forest. Did you ever see Once Upon a Forest?
No.
Okay. Watch all of these. Watch all of these, and you tell me that they're not terrifying. Once again, they're about like little critters that need to like move because of like noxious gas being like exposed into the woods. And it's really scary. Like it's like these really dark themes and these really dark, like, and I mean physically dark, like there's a lot of like, it's just like visually very like dark. And things like, I feel like The Labyrinth is really scary. Like that feels very horror to me, even though like they're mostly like puppets, but there's some humans.
Oh no, there's something very scary and unnerving about the way that puppets move, I think, in general.
Yes. Yeah. So I feel like these were a lot of, and of course there's like the classics, like, Friday the 13th and, classic horror movies that I loved. I remember when I was younger, this is dating me just a little bit, but renting movies was still a thing. So when I was like 13, I would walk to the movie store every Friday night and I would rent Jeepers Creepers because I thought it was the scariest movie of all time. And I would rent it every weekend for months. And I just loved that movie. Anything scary, I just really, really loved.
Yeah, there's something I feel like, and I don't know if necessarily like the younger generations now have that as much as, kind of our generations did, but definitely I think that there is this like this fascination to the dark and to fear and kind of feeling fear in a very controlled sense through horror that really connects with everyone, but also like especially with kids, because like there definitely was like, I feel like anytime I talk to someone, there's like some weird scary thing they were obsessed with as a kid. And I know that for me, definitely it was like I really was obsessed with this movie called Return to Oz, which I don't know if you saw it, but it was supposed to be, it's the sequel to Wizard of Oz, but it was like direct to video from Disney, and it has like a young Fairuza Balk in it, who, if anyone has seen The Craft, she was like Nancy in The Craft. And so so like she's a child playing Wendy, and the whole movie is set in like this this asylum where after the events of the first movie, she's considered like crazy, and so she like and so then the events of the movie take place, and there's like these terrifying figures that Dorothy encounters in Oz and sees as she sees how it has changed since she was last there. So like there's these really bizarre creatures that have these really long gangly limbs, which, you know, I'm wearing my Freddy, you know, dress right now, but you know, like very Nightmare on Elm Street with like Freddy with like the long limbs. They're like that, but with their arms and their legs, and their hands and feet are wheels, and they're called the Wheelers, and they just move around. It's just crazy. There's a part where there's a woman who's called Mombi, who like literally she can take off her head, and there's a hall full of heads that she can like place on her body. So it's like horrific stuff, but I was obsessed with it as a kid. Bizarre. And yes, very weird stuff, but I was obsessed with it as a kid, and to the point where I was like, I don't know what this is. Like, did this exist? Did I make this up? And so when I found it later in life, I was just like very happy that I didn't just make this thing up.
Yeah.
But
there are there's just fever dream movies. Like there was this one called Finding Nemo. Did you ever watch Finding Nemo?
Not the fish one, right?
No. Wait, it's not Finding Nemo. That is the fish one. No, wait, what is the fish one called? We're wasting time. We don't have to talk about that.
Yes, but anyways.
Yeah, yes. The controlled fear is certainly a thing that is, I feel very, like I was brought up, I wanted to be scared, but I wanted to be scared in a very controlled way. And I still do.
Yes. And I think that that's something that is so fascinating. I know that there's this weird idea that, you know, that there's this new thing called like literary horror in books or elevated horror in film. This notion that for some people that think that like horror that is doing something socially, that is saying something with some sort of lens on society, where there's you know, some kind of subtext of something greater being said, as though that's like something new that hasn't happened throughout the history of horror. You know what I mean? All the way back to like, you know, even Frankenstein. You know what I mean? It has like these themes of you know, of science and you know what it means to be a god and all of these things, right? Like and what it means to be human. And so I really don't love that idea that this is like a new thing. I feel like it's something that's very, very common. And so one of the things that I really liked about Bad Cree is that, you know, you really, and I don't want to spoil the book too much because, you know, there's a lot that goes on in there, but there's a very specific colonial history to the territory Mackenzie is from, which is where a lot of the horror springs from. There's this history of this land and her family too, that's kind of all tied up together. And it kind of reminds me, there's a lot of Indigenous authors who kind of really talk when they approach horror, they bring in colonialism as a haunting almost. And I think that that's really an interesting kind of concept, not just in your book, but in the world around us. So I kind of was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, about colonialism's legacy on the land it touches, how it haunts us in your book and then in real life as well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, the violences that have been inflicted on Indigenous people due to colonialism is horrific. That's a horror story. And a lot of, as you said, the setting of this novel mostly takes place in Treaty 8, which is my home territory, which is a beautiful territory, and also has this a very you know, very complex history because of settlement and colonialism. And one of those griefs is ecological grief. The territory pre-contact was full of buffalo and grasslands. And now there are no buffalo, and we have something like 93% less 93% of the grasslands, the types of grass that used to exist in the land, don't anymore, because of the settlement of farmland and just, colonialism generally. And that's so horrific. That is a wild thing to have happened to this place. Despite that, it's still a beautiful place. It's still a beautiful land. And there's still extraction that happens there. And there's still these violences that happen there all the time. And there's still communities there thriving. And there's still families loving there, and when you think about, I think that's so, what a ripe place for horror, which is both awe-inspiring and, it does dig deeper into, a lot of these other things happening currently, like in the real world.
Yeah, I think that that's something that I loved so much about it, is that it was this kind of undercurrent in the book. There's, there's different ways that obviously that you can read any text. You can just read what's happening in terms of what's happening with the characters, but also what I think is so rich about Bad Cree is that there is this really rich subtext where what's happening within the family is kind of what needs to be faced. The ways that colonialism has affected not only the lands, but the people in those lands, and what that means for our families, and what that means for how we experience both joy and terror, and how those things knit together. But okay, I do know that we have a couple of questions, so I think
Great.
that we're going to do audience Q&A.
Cool.
I'm going to turn that terrible ticker back on so I can make us a little bit bigger.
No, I like it. I'm glad that it was there. It's so fun.
First off, thank you both so much. This has really been incredible and also terrifying because Return to Oz, the Wheelers, like as soon as you said that, I was like, oh my God. Like,
I need to watch it. I need to watch it. It sounds amazing.
We watched, like, my sister loved Wizard of Oz, and so we watched it at a very young age, and I was like, this is a terrifying movie. Like,
which is also, Wizard of Oz is very scary. It's a very scary movie.
Yeah. So since we are talking about scary, and since the Reader Beware reading group is watching and they have their questions, but I'm going to start off with one of mine. I am too scared to read almost any of the books that they discuss. I especially have a bird phobia, which is like, yeah. So I'm assuming that this book would be traumatizing for me. So I want you to like put this at a level of like, okay, 1, like this is something that is going to only traumatize you a little bit, to like 10, where like I would need full like body armor to encounter the outside world.
I mean, I think that like really hardcore, strict horror genre readers might even have a hard time classifying Bad Cree as like conventional horror. It is like a slow burn, and there is like some gore and body horror that does occur towards the end of the novel, but I would say it's more moody and I don't know, there's suspense and things like that. So I don't know, I want to say like, and there are birds. There are birds. So maybe for you, it'd be like a 6. I don't know, Alicia. What do you think?
Okay, so this is the thing actually I've been talking a lot about, because there is, even though like we like to talk about, or well, we talked about kind of like horror or literary fiction kind of having these kinds of the gatekeeping type situation. I do think sometimes there are horror fans who are kind of gatekeepy, and so they're kind of like, oh, this isn't like the most terrifying thing ever. It's not, so so then there is they're like, oh, that's not horror. I personally don't subscribe to that. I think that there's if we're dealing with like basically like societal fears or hauntings or things like that, then that for me is horror. I think that it is a gripping book that's going to keep you turning the pages, but I also don't think I think that like I don't know that it would necessarily make you afraid to go to sleep. I think it would make you more like wanting to know what the mystery is, essentially, if that makes sense. So yeah, maybe like unless you're really afraid of birds, then it's like, then it's then maybe it would be like a 4.
So
but then bumped up to 6 with the birds.
Exactly. You got two more points. I agree. I think it's like on the lower end of like, yeah, I guess it would for any hardcore fan of any fan base can be very problematic, can be toxic. So yeah, so perhaps in those like conventional sort of definitions, it's not really, it's not super high up there. So Shane, I think you'd be good.
It's not like a Saw movie. It's not like a slasher movie type situation.
Well, since you're both Canadian, I will. I watched Three Pines, the adaptation of Louise Penny, and there are a lot of birds in that series, and it is like I love me a mystery, but I was like, there are too many birds in this show. It's big thumbs up on that Louise Penny adaptation. But anyway, let's get to some of not my questions. So Leo is asking, and Reader Beware, are y'all ready?
I heard it. No.
All right. They're just enjoying the wine, and enjoying the show.
As they should.
Yeah. So Leo asks, what advice would you give to a younger writer who is not technically trained?
I think I don't think that you need to be technically trained at all. That is not a requirement. Alicia is somebody who has not done an MFA and is a very prolific, amazing, and brilliant writer. I think that the advice I would give is to write a lot and to read a lot. I think those things have what the MFA gave me, like this technical training gave me, was like dedicated time for 3 years to write. Because it was like classes that like I had to write something for. So I was really forced to like to turn out pages, which was really great. And I did learn a lot in that time. Of course I did, but there was a lot of, barriers in academia, and there was a lot of unlearning I had to do, as I've mentioned. So I don't think that is a requirement at all. Just, I think having dedicated time to do that is going to be more beneficial than anything. But Alicia, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like one of the things that was really important for me was to actually read screenwriting books, because screenwriting is something that's very, very structured. And I tell this to everybody as I'm like, you don't understand how plot works until you understand structure and what it's supposed to be doing. And because screenwriting is so structured, like literally they'll be like inciting incident should be on page 10. First act turning point is page 20 and stuff like that. And they tell you what these things are. And then you start watching movies or reading books and starting to figure out what these things are doing and what their purpose is. And then like just really like reading with an eye to being like, okay, I'm like, if you want to read something that you've already read before that you like, or even something you don't like, what is it that you like about this? What is it you don't like about this? And then start really asking yourself questions about what is the effect of starting the book or the scene here? What if we started it later? What would that do? And then you start really and then I feel like that's how you teach yourself craft, is by looking at what other people have done, seeing what's worked, seeing what hasn't, and then really using those tools yourself when you're trying to tell your own stories, essentially. So like, yeah, craft books are really great. I actually just bought one on suspense that I'm going to be reading before I start my next novel. I just think these are like good reminders, right?
Yeah.
And even when we've learned stuff, like I've written a novel already, but I want to read this book because I want to have a fresh perspective going into the next one, you know? And we're always learning, so it's never going to be like you've finished. So
yeah, it's not going to be like you're technically trained now, so you're good. It's like you are always learning. Actually, Eden Robinson, who is this a wonderful writer who wrote the Trickster series, she said this exact thing. Was just like when she wrote a novel, you know, she was learning all these things in order to do that. And then she wrote a trilogy and she had to learn all these new things in order to do that. Like, it's one of those things you're always learning. So yeah, I think that's so apt.
So I know we are here to celebrate your book, Jessica, but I do want to allow a little bit of time for Alicia to tell us like a little synopsis, because I just shared the link for how they can pre-order the book,
Yes.
which in the US is going to be available in September.
Yeah, it's I'm actually terrible at this. I'm trying to figure out the best way to like do a short thing, like a basically like really short thing. So basically, this is where I'm at right now. So it's about this woman who grew up on Six Nations Reserve with her mother. Her dad passed away when she was young, and she lived there and was just mostly taking care of her mom. She kind of meets this white academic and falls in love, and it's a kind of a whirlwind romance, and she ends up marrying him and pregnant. And at the start of the book, she has just had their child, and she's living in Toronto in this beautiful home that his rich mother bought them. So you know, he wants her to focus on, in between raising the baby, on what she's always wanted to do as a writer, which is, you know, do this modern retelling of the Haudenosaunee creation story. But then as she's home alone with the baby, there are things that start to come up from her past that remind her of things that maybe she wanted to put away. And eventually there's a figure that kind of appears to her and says, whatever is going to happen coming up, you have to write this story. You have to keep writing it. And so from there, things start to get a little bit weird. She starts talking to things, and things are talking to her, and it gets very, very surreal from there. But anyways, the thrust of the book is figuring out who this person is, why they want her to write this. Is what's happening real? Is it not? Does it matter? Etc. So yeah.
And then she fell so good. Sounds so amazing, Alicia. I'm so excited for it.
Yes, very, very also similar vibes, where it's not like, I feel like it's not complete horror, but it's like it's definitely got very horrific things in there. Actually, it's funny. I had a scene in there that my editor made me take out because she said that it was like too horrific, and that like people would close the book. She was worried people would close the book and not read any further, so I had to take it.
I want the version with that in it.
Yeah, anyways, so that had to get taken out, but you know, anyways, similar vibes though. I feel like we're similar, kind of like horror, but also a little bit of fantasy, but also a little bit of literary, and it's kind of this
in there.
Yeah, so it's, I don't know, we're in similar vibes for our books.
I love that for us.
All right, Eamon, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, asks, what would you say was the most challenging and the most rewarding part of writing this novel? Any advice for other writers working on debuts?
I think the most challenging part was, and the most rewarding, both of those things, was listening to my gut on things. It's really wonderful. So I had some really amazing editors work with me on this book, who I'm so, so grateful for. And it is so great to have another set of eyes, to have advice, to have these like professionals help you. And always, particularly my editors, some people don't have this experience, but my editors were really like, we want to know your vision, and everything we suggest is going to be to help that vision, become a reality. And so I'm getting edits back, and right from the beginning, they were, went from very substantive structural edits. And some of the suggestions I didn't know about. I didn't know if I wanted to do this thing, if I wanted to accept this thing they were suggesting. And so I did sort of some deep work where I did a couple of things, actually, what Alicia was saying before, I'm trying things out. So I would say a lot of the time, I'm gonna make this change in like another document or whatever, and I'm gonna see how it feels to me. I'm gonna see how it reads after I do that. So I would accept it, and I would, rewrite it or make that change in another document and read it again and see if that felt right, if it felt like a good choice. And then I would go with my gut on it. So, sometimes that it was absolutely accepting the things they suggested. And sometimes I was just like, that's not right. That's not right for what I'm trying to do. And they were incredibly supportive in whatever decision that I made. But it was really important to know. It was really important to like listen to myself and to try these things. And, it did take more time as well. Like my book was in editing for 2 years, which is which is a long time for a novel, actually. But I think really worth it, because I really got to grow in that way. And it was incredibly challenging to figure out what I wanted to do for this novel, and also very rewarding because it came out exactly how, there are always things I look at it now and I'm like, I wish I did this or this, but it was really rewarding. So I think, for writers who are writing their debut novel, I think that it is so natural to not know, not feel entirely sure about some things or some suggestions you get from outside readers who are incredibly essential to your process. But all of those suggestions are valid in one way or the other. Whether you take that advice or not, it's really important to do that deep work to be like, does this make sense? Is this what I'm trying to do?
Yeah. All right, I want to bring the Reader Beware group on at least, even if you don't have any questions, because I want them to like do a little cheers with their wine or whatever. And then we will, hey, you're on camera. All right, so we'll end with a question from Zoe, who has been commenting a few times with Return to Oz is amazing, and Jordan Peele. But Zoe is asking if there are any hopes of an adaptation, especially a horror musical.
Oh, a horror musical. Oh my God, I never even considered that. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see Bad Cree be as big and like vast and in as many different mediums as possible. Like I really love the story. I just love it. And a musical, amazing. Yeah. What a great idea. Thank you, Zoe.
Alicia's read all the screenwriting books, so she'll do the structure, and I don't know how to write music, but I'll do it anyway.
Well, we have our team right here then.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I will say that her book is very, very visual too. So like I could totally see it being adapted for the screen in any particular way. So yeah.
If you're watching from Netflix, just give me a call.
All the Netflix execs tuning in for my launch right now.
Yep.
All pain.
I'm available at the bookstore, and I will contact Jessica via email. All right. Well, I want to congratulate you and thank you so much for doing this event with us. It has been such a pleasure, and I wish you all the best on this book and of your future books, because I'm certain that this one is going to be a national, international best-selling book, and we are going to be excited to have you in person maybe for the next book. Who knows?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Alicia, for your amazing, insightful questions. I'm so, so, so excited for your book. Thank you for gracing us with those beautiful earrings. You're the best.
You know, I had to bring them in for, you know, the hauntings that as we were talking about. So got to be on theme. Read this book. It's so brilliant. And it's so beautiful. And yes, anyways, I love Jessica. I love her work. So yeah. And if you read it, tell me how you liked it. Let's have a talk after.
Yeah. And I did share the link to buy Jessica's book, Alicia's book that is already out, Alicia's book that is available for pre-order. Those are all available from Left Bank Books for purchase to pick up, to be sent anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. So we thank you all so much. We have a huge virtual audience as well as our in-person watch party for Reader Beware. And I'm so happy that everyone joined us tonight. This has been a lot of fun. So have a good rest of your evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.